Hello, I'm Carl Stabe, and today I have Bobby Powers with me. He's a coach, a leadership coach, and trainer. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to join you, Carl. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. To me, this is the best part of my business is interviewing people like yourself. And we talked about some of the questions just to make sure they line up, but I'm already going to go off script because I just realized, I understand. For me, systems are so important because the systems that you build are the things that you care about. And I think sometimes leaders are misguided and they try to create systems for things that really shouldn't be created, or they don't create systems for things that they should. Do you have a past boss or leader that maybe created a system or a process that just irritated the heck out of you?
Yeah, I think the best example of that would be I've had a couple of bosses in the past who were micromanagers. I'm sure we've all had that before. And they had a specific way that they wanted something done. And I'm talking like they had the specific cell in the spreadsheet that this always goes there, this goes in this column, this goes in this row. And so when people come in with an overly refined system and they tell everyone who reports to them, you have to use my system in this way and you can't make any changes to it, that is really frustrating for a lot of bold leaders, a lot of employees that want to innovate. They want to think outside the box. They want to do something different. And so early in my careers, I had a couple of those bosses, and I wasn't in the kind of manager role that I could push back that much against that. That was frustrating because I felt like it clipped my wings a little bit and the other team members' wings of us not being able to invent new and better ways of doing something. And so I think for any leaders out there, systems are extremely important. I have many of them that I use. But then there's this question of how far do you take that system and how much leeway do you give your people to do things in their own way? And I think that's a difficult thing to try to figure out as a leader.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit there. How have you done that? And, how do you balance that, right? Because you're right. If you have a certain goal you're trying to hit, and hey, past people have used this system, it's worked well, but everybody's different. So how do you
Yeah.
balance that?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I try to do and I try to coach our leaders to do is to, if you're giving out an assignment to someone on your team, explain what has to be done and why it has to be done, but let the person decide how to do it. So you are delegating the how. You're letting that person come up with the how. And as long as it does this thing, as long as it achieves this ultimate outcome, then I don't really care exactly what it looks like. I don't care how you get there. We have to hit this metric. We have to accomplish this goal. We have to complete this product that needs these requirements. But how you meet those requirements, I don't really care so much about.
Mm, I love that. Okay. So the system that you're saying is give them the guardrails and give them the goal of where they need to end up, but allow them to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I had one colleague that I worked with at a past job. Her name was Jen, and Jen always used the phrase, "We want to give people wide streets with high curbs." A
Mm.
high curb is in these are the regulations that you have to fall between. You can't go exactly, above this, below this. You have to do this thing. But I'm going to give you a wide street of you get to make a lot of decisions in there. You get to decide how to do this as long as it doesn't go over this curb that I've established. And I think that's an interesting way of explaining it. So I really, for me, my work day to day, I'm a director of learning and development. I train managers. I run new manager boot camps. I help managers learn how to do their jobs and help companies run efficiently. So as I'm training all these managers, I want them to empower the people that work for them. That's so
Mm.
important, is that we don't want those people to feel like they have to do it our way all the time. We want to take their best ideas and how they want to work, but we also want to give them a little bit of latitude so then they can do it in a way that they actually understand a little bit more than we do on the ground what works best. So that's why we try to delegate the how.
Okay, and I think then this leads to listening skills, right? Like you have to, and I struggle with this because I think, you know, as a father, as a leader myself, owning my own company, you know, you want to explain how to do things so they don't mess up or they don't,
Yeah.
you know, go down the wrong path. But what you're saying is you really have to listen to them and understand what their vision for that project is, and probably really be, you know, more about the understanding where they're coming from and be curious about their perspective versus jumping in and, oh, and, you know, making those guardrails too narrow and really stifling them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Really, like at the core of leadership, I think one of the qualities you have to be best at as a leader is listening, just like you said. And so when we run these new manager boot camps, that's actually one of the core skills we train all of our new managers. And it's not a normal leadership curriculum thing. It's not something that you normally will see in a lot of manager training programs online, for instance. But listening is really at the heart of all leadership because if you're someone who you want to lead with empathy, you want to lead in a way that you're bringing out the best in your people, you have to learn from your people. And you can't be leading with the kind of ego that just assumes you know the right way of doing things. You have to be leading with a listening ear that you're willing to change direction. You're willing to incorporate the ideas and feedback that you get from your direct reports.
Okay, so how do you do that? So I know you have a model for this, right?
Yeah, for sure. So a model that I've taken to using, and it's a Bobby Power special, Carl. So this is something that you won't find on the internet anywhere except on my website, is a model called ACE. So it stands for attention, curiosity, empathy. And this is a model that I was just so tired of all of the trite listening advice out there that we've all heard the same listening advice probably 100 or 1,000 times of like drive through listening, repeat back what you heard, and all this stuff. Like I kept hearing the same thing over and over and over. And I wanted to take the best crystallized leadership insights that I had heard about listening and put those into a simple model. So it's this ACE model. So first step is attention. You cannot achieve what you want to do in a conversation without listening on a basis of attention, deep, deep attention. And specifically, what I talk about when I think of listening with attention is the idea that you're not just listening with your ears, you're listening with your eyes. You're
Mm,
listening with your entire body. You're dialed into what the person's saying. And so, as we train people how to listen better, one of the key components isn't just to eliminate all the distractions, it's not to avoid the bad things, it's to also actively do the good things. That if I'm on a Zoom call with you and you're a direct report of mine, for instance, we're having a one-on-one, I should be listening with an attention level that I can pay attention to when you're feeling nervous or uncomfortable. I can look at when your eyes flicker over to the side. I can look at when you stammer a little bit in a one-on-one. And I have that kind of attention to pay attention to what's going on.
mm,
So that's that first level of listening with attention. And that's kind of the baseline. But then we want to go beyond that. The second step is listening with curiosity. So listening with curiosity is pretty much putting yourself in the mindset of, I wonder why the person has this perspective. I wonder why they think what they do. I want to be curious and learn more. And one of the exercises I've used with people before with listening with curiosity is that if you put two people from different political camps in a conversation together and they have supercharged opinions about something, they
mhm,
should, I would hope, be able to hit a point that they can listen with curiosity and ask thoughtful, non-judgmental questions of each other of, oh, Carl, can you tell me more about what caused you to vote that way? Can you tell me more about what informed your opinion on that issue? And this curiosity is a really key thing that if we could get better at that as a species, we'd be in a very, very different place right now in America. And it all comes back to, are you judging the person or are you curious about what they think on something? So those are the
mm.
first two components. I'm curious if that brings up any thoughts for you on those first two.
Oh God, so much around curiosity for me. I've been working on this, and I think it's hard because the brain is wired to judge, right? You
Yeah.
are trying to put things in particular buckets so you understand it better. And you're trying to do that with the people that report to you. You're trying to do that with family members. You're trying to do that with strangers because, and I always go back to the idea of the living in a tribe. We had to assess things quickly and understand who could do what and be able to execute on those things. And I think again and again, I fall into the trap of judging instead of being curious. So this is important for me and probably a lot of people listening is really honing that skill. And so before we do go on to empathy, because I think that's another one I've been working on, especially as a male that grew up in the 80s. Um, I've had to work on that a lot. But coming back to curiosity, I would like to understand how do you catch yourself? Is there a system of noticing these things, catching them, and then redirecting yourself back to curiosity?
Yeah, great question. So generally, judgmental starts with questions of why. Why did you do that? Why do you believe the way you do? Why is actually a really negative way to start questions because it puts
Mm,
people on the defensive. So if I'm having a conversation with someone and my mind start going, why, I know that I'm in a headspace of judgment. I'm in a headspace of wanting that person to defend something that I disagree with. And so we try to teach our managers to rather than starting questions with why in that judgmental lens, we want to be curious. So curious questions generally start with what or with how.
mm,
So what was it that led you to believe that? Or could you share a little bit more about how you came to think that way about this team process? How did you build a relationship with that client? And why do you think they feel the way they do? So, as we're asking these types of questions, usually why is a signal of judgment? Why put somebody on the defensive? And we want to instead try to reframe in a different way. So, that's one of the most basic tenets of this.
I love that. And I think so important to the vernacular, which the vernacular that you choose often will determine how the other person reacts. And you can't always control it, but I think, like you said, why, how versus why can make a huge difference in how they perceive your attitude in that situation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, really, the questions we ask are the framework of the conversations that we have. If you can learn how to ask slightly better, less judgmental questions, then you are perceived as a better listener and you also gather way better information from whoever you're talking to, whether that's a direct report, a client, a prospect, a vendor, whoever that may be.
Mm. Okay, so let's move on to empathy.
Yeah, so empathy is the third and final step. That's really the creme de la creme that you try to build to in listening. And this is where you're not just listening with attention, you know what they're saying. You're not just listening with a curious mind, you're also listening for their priorities and values. And so that's kind of the core of empathy is
Mm,
if I understand what drives Carl and who he is as a human, then I can better empathize. And so, like, I've run a listening exercise with leaders before that was really powerful. That we had people pair up, two leaders would pair up, and one person would talk for 2 minutes about what they've been up to this summer. And then after the end of that 2 minutes, the other person, their silent partner, had to then tell me, the facilitator, what values and priorities did you hear in that 2 minutes that you
mm,
could not say a dang thing? And it was really interesting because it put people in this frame of if you hear someone's story about, a family vacation or, a fight with a family member or a dog that they had to get put down this summer, whatever that was that they've been up to for the last few months, it then immediately signals to you what's important to this person. And then the second question I asked was, well, what in those priorities and values, what lines up with your own priorities and values? And this is where connections start to happen as we realize, oh, well, this person's a family person, or this person loves their animals. I love my animals. I love my
Hmm.
family. I struggle with my weird aunt or uncle that shows up to family reunions. So you start to have greater empathy by just training people a little bit of what to look for and looking for that commonality and what are the things that drive all of us as humans. So a lot of this empathy step is putting yourself in their shoes and understanding that even though we all have very different backgrounds, at the core we have the same ingredients that make us human.
I really enjoyed that. I enjoy the examples too, because I think you're right. And often we, and I do this all the time. I listen to talk. I do this to my wife, and try to catch myself doing it because I'm like, no, I'm not really listening. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm gonna say next. And I think this comes because anxiety, right? We're like, well, I want to perceive like I'm listening, and I want to show this person that I'm listening to what they say. And when I say something in response, but when you make them sit for 2 minutes and just listen to that person, I'm guessing also too is like that person might talk about they're putting down their dog for the first minute and then they're like, well, I don't want that to be the whole thing I talk about. So then they'll switch topics or something like that. And I think by not talking, you're getting more out of them because they have to talk during those 2 minutes. And I think probably when you have one-on-ones with employees, if you're just asking them about their projects. And this is a common thing in so many organizations. You're just asking them about their projects. You're just trying to, get the status update. You're just trying to maybe help them find understand some blockers and then help them fix that. But you're not really understanding who that person is. And when you, and I recently asked a group of people, what's your rose and thorn? And like
Yeah.
what's going well for you and what's not going well for you, and you could see people like, oh, okay, cool. And we went around the table and everybody, you know was a Zoom call. We went around the Zoom call and everybody said what their rose and thorn was. And I find just that fascinating. Like you can see where people are focusing, where they're grateful and then where they're feeling that pain. And so
Yeah.
I think you're so right around really being able to listen and be empathetic, because once again I've struggled with it and I know other people do too, because we have a job and we're trying to reach these certain endpoints or milestone or goals, and we're there's push to get there, but we're in that process. We're pushing almost so hard that we don't understand what's working well for people and what's not. And coming back to those listening skills and really being empathetic, you can then, and I know I'm being long-winded here. You can then design systems for people based off of the content that they gave you, like, their dog or whatever. You then understand them better and you're more willing to then allow them to build the systems that they need to flourish. Is
Yeah, for
that,
sure. For sure.
can
Yeah,
you,
I think that's well said.
can you dig into that a little bit about building systems around people through listening skills, through empathy?
Well, I want to circle back really quickly to something that you said because I think it's an important point. You mentioned an example with your partner of you sometimes not listening well. And I've had that happen as well. And I think this is a great example of this ACE model in action. So I want to just use this as kind of a microcosm of what we're talking about. So I had a situation a few weeks ago where my wife was talking to me about something, and I had zoned out for a second and was not being a good listener in that moment. And so then after she noticed that, she said, oh, well, I feel like you haven't been listening to me. And I rifled back the last couple sentences she said. And I was like all proud of myself, right? Like I can repeat back what I heard. I'm a parrot essentially. And I was all excited about my ability to parrot back what I heard. But what was important in that moment wasn't me knowing the words, it was her feeling listened to. And I was just listening on maybe cutting the top of that ACE model of like I was kind of in the attention bucket. If I was listening with enough attention that I could parrot back a couple things. But beyond that, I was not truly engaged in the conversation. I wasn't being curious. I wasn't being empathetic. I was not dialed in fully. And so I think that shows up in our lives all the time is that people know whether not only we're hearing them with what they're saying, they know whether they feel heard. And that is a
Hmm.
huge, huge distinction that I think ACE or any kind of model you use for listening can really help out with is helping people know that you're so dialed in, that you're asking curious questions and you're listening with a deeper level of empathy and understanding. So sorry to tangent there, but I felt it was important based on what you had shared.
No, no, I'm glad you did. Yes. So coming back to the systems part, so understanding people and listening to them, and then which will allow you to design better systems. Do you believe that statement to be true? And if so, how do you use that empathetic ear or listening skills to help design better systems for people?
Yeah, really, it connects to one of the core things I believe about leadership is that as you climb up the rungs of an organization, you're tasked with creating more of these frameworks, more of these systems for the entire company that you lead. But unfortunately, the higher you climb up a company, the further removed you are from the actual work. So for any entrepreneurs out there, you're hiring a virtual assistant to work for you, or you're hiring your first couple employees, and those people come on and they're doing more of the work now. They're doing cold calls, they're sending emails, whatever. And then that just escalates as the company gets larger and larger. And so as that happens, if you're removed from the work, you don't know exactly what's going on the client basis the same way you did before. So listening is your framework for client knowledge. It's your framework for what concerns do people have with your pricing model. It's your framework for what's working and not working in your business. Listening unlocks a lot of that. And specifically, as you have one-on-ones with people, if you have a list of go-to questions about several of these different areas of the business that you need to make sure you have a full understanding of, then those go-to questions that you can ask in one-on-ones, that can end up leading you to make way better decisions and feel more connected to what's going on in the business. Does that make sense at all?
Yes. And so, but I want to get into the systems part of it as well, because as you are really understanding people and you're able to then say, okay, Tom, you're really good with, closing sales. Amy, you're really good at nurturing prospects. And then it's really saying, okay, the system that we have here, you know, understanding how Tom does this, understanding how, you know, all the different players do it. And then you can string them together, or you can then help them refine their systems. Because I think that to me is the most crucial part of a good leadership system is refinement, iterating on what's working well and eliminating the stuff that isn't working so well. So coming back to that, okay, now that we're listening and we understand these people better, then it's about helping them, guide them to create the type of systems that will help them thrive. Can you tell me a little bit about, maybe as you've worked with train or you're training as you're training somebody and they're maybe trying something because they think that's the way it should be done, but coming back to the you need to not loosen up the guardrails a little bit and allow them to create their own systems. How do you do that?
How do you allow your people to create their own systems?
Well, how and then guide them to it as well, so the systems are designed that fit their personality.
Yeah, I don't totally know how to answer that because really, like, I think as an employee gets more tenured, more experience, they have a little bit more knowledge, they have more frameworks to draw upon. They see more of these systems in action. Teaching people how to build the system is something that I think we come to you for, right? Like leaders come to the Carls of the world because it's so tough to train other people how to think in that way.
Mm.
And so I don't feel like I actually have a good answer to like how do you train someone to think in that systems approach. I would just call up my friend Carl and try to help him through
That's true. It is true. It is.
it.
It is a skill that a lot of people do struggle with. But I think we all. This is the thing, though, is we all develop systems. We all have a way where we process email, a way where we follow up with people, a way. All these things, and sometimes they're very basic, and sometimes they're complex,
Yeah.
and we don't even. And I think this is what happens to a lot of leaders. That's the way they did it 5 years ago, and now they're I'm gonna implement it like this. And I think that's where really listening and understanding what this person is where they're coming from, so then you can say, wait, why are you doing it this way? Or
Yeah.
how did you come, not why you do it, but how did you come across your methodology for doing
Love
this?
it. What a better question.
And then you're curious, but that's what I mean by helping them understand that, right? Helping them
Yeah.
see that so they're self-aware. And then when you do that, you're like, oh, I don't need to keep doing it this way.
Yeah. Yeah, on a related note, we have a bunch of new hires that start at my company every month. So I work at a company called Jitasa. We're in multiple countries across the globe, and we do nonprofit accounting. So we hire all these new hires that come in as accountants for our organization. And some of those people are early career individuals. They don't have systems yet. They don't have a foundation of how they process their emails, like you were saying, or how they handle client inquiries that come in about XYZ topic. And so recently, we actually ran what was, I think, one of the more interesting trainings I've ever done in my career, which is I went out and talked to about 20 different managers across the company, and I asked them, what are the systems that you use for productivity? What are the systems you personally use for organization? What do you use for communication? And then we put together a training that we called 45 productivity tips and tricks, and we shared screenshots of people's email organization systems. We
Mm,
shared screenshots, stories, examples of how people handle tracking client notes. And some people do it in OneNote, other people do it in Google Docs, other people do it in
mhm,
some like, app on their phones. Whatever the system is, the point of the training was it doesn't matter which system you choose, you need to have a system, just like you said
mhm,
before. Everyone needs their own system that works for them and their workflow. And so all of these new hires that went through this training, what we ask them to do at the end is you've heard these 45 different things. Now go out and try a couple of them. You've heard ideas from all these different managers across the company, and I don't know which one will work because I don't know your workflow, but choose three or four of those and put them into practice this week and see what works. So
mm,
I think to me that's one of the biggest unlocks really with systems is trying to get people to share what system they're using, and then sometimes seeing someone else's system sparks insight in you that you might say, oh, I'm not going to do it Bobby's way. That way doesn't actually click with my workflow. But seeing his system inspires me to do it in this slightly different way. And I
I
don't really
love that.
care how people do this. I just want them to have a way of being productive and efficient in their work.
Yes, that's brilliant. Yeah, because I think there's so much knowledge inside of an organization. And when you figure out or find a way, a system to help share that stuff, it helps everybody.
Yeah.
And some people, maybe you're 54 years old and you're like, no, none of these work for me. But if you're 23 years old or 26 and you're like, oh, I never thought about doing it in that way, that can be eye-opening and can change
Yeah.
their whole workflow. And now I find it fascinating with AI really coming into the picture. And I'm curious about your company. Has it been trying to integrate AI into the workflow at all?
Yeah, we've used AI in a few different ways. Everything from, helping create macros for Excel spreadsheets if there's data that we need to process, to helping refine an email that we're about to send. And so just like it seems like almost every company out there, we're experimenting with AI constantly to try to see what it can do to help us out. Now, the one note I would share though is that us on the leadership team, so we have a core leadership team, about a dozen of us that are across multiple countries that help run the company. And we are very leery of using AI for too many things because we see that one of our main differentiators is the service that we offer to clients and how human we are, how compassionate we are, how empathetic we are. And so we make sure that we use AI with guardrails of we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to allow it to create a final email that we're going to send externally, but we'll use it to say, comb through and vet an email as an initial draft of something that we've already written.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for all companies out there, they're trying to figure out how much can we use this thing and how do we not let it get out of control.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna shift this a little bit because I think stress is a big part of being a leader, and there needs to be a way to systematize serenity. And I know you have a love for Stoic philosophy.
I do,
So
yeah.
how do you monitor your own stress, and how do you process it, or how do you have a way for a system that helps you? And then do you teach other people this at your company as well?
Yeah, the most systematized version of it that I use is just a journaling practice.
Hmm.
So nothing super crazy or fancy, but extremely, extremely important. And it's one of those things that, journaling has been around for thousands of years and it's never been sexy, but it's always been important. And so for me personally, I have a device here that I take copious notes on for work, for life. And every day I try to sit down, I try to get my thoughts out onto this pad.
Hmm.
And I do that in a few ways. One is I try to do three gratitudes, things that I'm thankful for. And if I'm struggling with anything that work day, or in my life outside of work, I actually try to frame that in my gratitudes, which is a little bit weird of like, let's say, I was sick back a few months ago and I missed a day of work. My gratitude that day was I'm thankful for the chance to relax today and watch some Netflix because I've been sick. And so systematizing serenity for me is choosing to never have a bad day because I'm mentally reframing things in my own mind and in my journal with how I process through an issue that comes up or an incident that we end up running into. It even connects to how we end up training a lot of our new hires is we have a company cultural norm of chase the challenge. So you're learning from the difficulty. And when we train people how to deal with challenges at work, we're doing it through this lens of chase the challenge, do the things that scare you. Or another way I've heard it described is run toward the fire, run toward the
Hmm.
things that are scary and frightening, because those things will teach you the most. And then you have to do the back end aspect of looking at how it went, journaling or thoughtfully self reflecting and saying, what did I learn from that? So another thing that I end up coding into my journal is stories of what I learned from different tough situations I went through. And I actually have those tagged in a note-taking tool that then those later become speeches or articles or trainings because I have all this rich body of evidence and data and stories that I've been through. So that's on one level, that's how I systematize Serenity.
No, I love that because I think too often we don't capture this stuff. And I'm a journaler myself, and I recently uploaded my journal entries into ChatGPT, and that's been really eye-opening because I can
Yeah.
ask that ChatGPT questions about how I felt, or, hey, did I write about this before? Or you tell me, I want a story because I write a newsletter too, and it helps me come up with different stories to come up with to for my newsletter. So I love that, and I think as whoever's listening, if they're in the car or whatever, but try to think about how you can apply your own ability to process your thoughts and emotions,
Yeah.
because back to your point of kind of I guess, redirecting your thoughts towards gratitude, um, it's often it's how we write the story in our head that dictates how we feel about it. And so, Viktor Frankl, the famous author who from the Nazi concentration camp, basically wrote a book, and Man's Search for Meaning, and that changed everything. And like he was so set on living and surviving to help get this book out into the world and to help other people that he made it through. I think I forget what the small percentage of people that actually made it through, and he made it
Yeah.
through because of this purpose and passion that he had.
Yeah, for sure. And he popularized a phrase that goes around a lot in Stoic philosophy circles these days, which is in between stimulus and response,
Mhm.
there is a space. So something happens to us, we choose how we want to respond to that.
Yeah.
So whether it's Viktor Frankl or it's Seneca or Epictetus or modern
Mm.
day Stoic philosophers like Ryan Holiday or Tim Ferriss, all these different thinkers, one of the biggest things I've taken away from them isn't so much a tangible system, it's a mental system. It's a
Yep.
mental framework or lattice in my head of how I want to deal with challenges that come in. And it's basically taking that stimulus and then using the space between that and my response and trying to figure out how can I harness this for good in some way.
Yes. Beautiful. Okay. And I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. Um, while I have you, because I think this is so important, there's people who are listening are leaders. They want to do a better job of onboarding people. Can you walk us through, your system for onboarding people from a high level perspective, what what you do, and then, how are you trying to reach the goals? I guess what are those goals that you're trying to reach, and what systems do you have in place to help you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just share some thoughts at a high level. And if anyone wants to follow up with me, you can always email me. You can find me online at bobbypowers.com. And my email address is plastered all over that website. One of the biggest things that we do is we run a monthly 3-day virtual cohort training for all of our new hires. And so this is a really important mechanism for us to bring in new hires and not only teach them the technical aspects of their job, like the accounting stuff that we do, but we train them about our company core values and norms. We actually have a session from our COO that we share stories from company history. So
Hmm.
these new hires are not only learning technical skills, they're being steeped in the culture of Jatasa that they can then learn a little bit about what we're proud of from our history, where we've been, where we're going. So that 3-day virtual cohort training is extremely, extremely helpful for us. If anyone wants to follow up, I can talk more in detail about what that looks like. Another thing we do that we launched about a year ago and it's been really effective is we do weekly new hire meetups. So this was something that I was looking for a way for us to have new hires be connected to their peers, even though we're not co-located in a physical office. We're spread all across the US and we're all across the globe in multiple different countries. And I was trying to figure out how can we get the water cooler effect or the cafeteria effect of people sitting down at a table together. And so what we ended up doing is we have a weekly meeting every Friday for 45 minutes that each new hire that's in their first few months at Jitasa gets together and we invite their managers to join as well. And we have a very, very simple 3-question agenda we do every Friday. One is an icebreaker question I send a day in advance. So that rotates all the time. Second question we do is I ask them, what's a new thing you've learned recently that you can share with the other new hires? And that just gets people talking about random things that they've stumbled across of, I learned how to do this and it was really cool. And then the other new hires on the call get to learn from that too. And the third question I actually think is the most powerful one. The third and final question we ask is, what's a mistake you've made recently and what did it teach you? And
Hmm.
this third question, I think, is a cultural unlock. It's a question that it helps the new hires know I don't have to be scared of making mistakes here. Again, they're new to the company. They don't know how we do things yet. And they're joining these meetups and we're talking about freely sharing our mistakes. And the way we position that is we say mistakes are okay, but if you don't learn from it and if you don't help teach other people that, then we didn't get much benefit from that mistake. We want to get benefit from these mistakes and share those. So that's my
Mm,
favorite part of the talks because when we get together for these short meetups, the new hires, they actually share. They talk about this stuff and they have me from the leadership team on the call. They still share with me there. They have their managers on the call. They still willingly share because we've developed psychological safety in that room, that Zoom room, that they know it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff. And we actually celebrate those mistakes in terms of helping other people on the call avoid them. So those new hire meetups have been a really great way for us to talk about a lot of non-work stuff. Usually the
mm.
icebreaker question goes really long. We kind of like talk about whatever and just have a good time. And then we also talk about some work stuff. So those are two of the biggest aspects that we have in new hire training. And then a third one that we use a lot is we have an internal Wikipedia, basically, like an internal knowledge base. We use Zendesk for that, but that's a place that employees can go and self-serve their own knowledge. And so they use it basically like how you would use an internal Google or Wikipedia, that they can type in any topic they're struggling with, and then up pops a page that gives them more information. And one of the pages in there is actually a list of our subject matter experts across the entire globe in our
Mm.
company for who is good at which topics you might be struggling with. So then you have a list of people who've opted in to be on that list and opted in for new hires to reach out to them. So those are three things I would leave you with. And again, follow up bobbypowers.com if you want to talk more in detail.
Thank you. Oh, those are great. Oh, that was perfect. That was a great way to end it too. So they bobbypowers.com. Where else you have a podcast?
I don't have a podcast. I'm on
Okay.
a guest on a lot of podcasts like this one, but then you can also find me on Substack. So I run a newsletter called Leader and Learner that you can find
Hmm.
on Substack, or you can find on bobbypowers.com/newsletter. And I send that every other Sunday. And it's a newsletter that basically collects all the things I've been reading, all the things I've been learning, and then one leadership insight every newsletter that it's a short little takeaway of just a couple minutes that you can apply to your work. So put a lot of time in that newsletter, and I love the chance to connect with other people over book recs or any other nerdy stuff.
Cool. Cool. All right, everybody, go check them out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Carl.